welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and this is my Trans Rights Readathon vlog. If you're not familiar with the Trans Rights Readathon, I'll leave links in the description, and you can check out my TBR and stuff like that in previous videos. During the course of the week, I'm going to be focusing on reading trans books, and for everyone that I read, I will also be donating to My Sister's House, which is a trans housing initiative. I'm going to be starting out the readathon with Transgender Warriors by Lee Fienberg. I'm super excited to read this one because I've loved everything else that they've written and have heard nothing but really great things about it. So I'll check back in with my thoughts on the book. It's actually day 2 of the readathon now, but I finished Transgender Warriors by Lee Fienberg, and it was incredible. I knew it was going to be good because their other stuff has also been very good, but this was definitely something that I needed to read. Definitely a good thing to start the readathon with. This is a nonfiction book about trans history. They go through and talk about basically early trans people. They talk about indigenous conceptions of gender, a couple of different figures like Joan of Arc, as well as kind of roles that cross-dressing or gender fuckery had in like the Middle Ages or before, and at other times. But while they're talking about this history, they're also kind of putting themselves in that context. So how they figured out their gender stuff, how they came to their sort of class consciousness, because that's also kind of a core of what they're talking about in here. The big, or one of the big kind of theses of this is that transphobia in the strict gender binary kind of came along with or grew at the same time as things like misogyny, colonialism, and kind of class struggle. And then with that conclusion also comes like a way forward and why trans liberation is necessary, but also why liberation for all minority groups is essential, why having resources for everyone is essential. So this was really wonderful. I love something that will tell you about the author, kind of why they're talking about history and politics, so that you know what direction they're coming from. But the fact that there are actual like memoir elements to this, it gives it more of a sense of self-awareness, and also learning about the authors is interesting. And also I think the impact of learning about marginalized history, like as a marginalized person, is really important to talk about. So this was very good. If you haven't already read anything by Lee Fienberg, pick something up now. I definitely recommend this. on top of having like the main narrative where they talk about some history, there's also a whole section, and kind of throughout the book you also see different photographs and captions that tell you who the person is. And that also kind of builds a history, and it kind of shows the, I guess, kind of diversity of trans people and the things that they did. A lot of the times, like politics and history stuff, I mean, a lot of it is very like good and interesting, but sometimes it gets to be kind of overwhelming. But I think that tied in with kind of their political understanding and way forward, this didn't feel overwhelming. I actually felt good finishing this. So yes, this was great. I need to figure out what to read next, and I do have quite a pile of physical books. I also have ebooks and audiobooks in mind, and I might do an audiobook because I do have a headache, so that might be good for it. I'll check back in when I've got more. It is day 3 of the Trans Rights Readathon, and last night I finished the audiobook of Little Fish by Casey Plett. This was not initially on my TBR. I had a headache and light hurt, so I decided to pick an audiobook, and my library was out of borrows for Hoopla, so I had to see what was available on Libby. That was one of the first ones that I saw, and it's one that's been on my radar for a while. It's messy queer lit fic with a lot of thematic layers, so right up my alley. It focuses on Wendy, who's a Canadian trans woman. Remy also has a lot to say about it, don't you? It's about a trans girl named Wendy, who's Canadian and grew up in a Mennonite family. She has to go back to her grandparents' home when her grandmother dies, and she gets a phone call from a family friend that she doesn't really know that says that she has a secret about her granddad who has passed away like something like 20 years ago. From what the person says, her granddad could have potentially been trans, and that's kind of where the story starts. Throughout this, you're really focused on what Wendy is doing in her life. She has some other big life changes on top of trying to decide whether or not she really wants to know what this woman is saying. Like, kind of doesn't matter. What did it really mean? That sort of thing. All the while, there are lots of themes around things like grief, transness, relationships and community in a lot of different ways, both looking within the trans community, within family, and a lot more. So there's a lot to it. The main character is also heavily dealing with alcoholism and kind of the repercussions of her behaviors that kind of span around that. So there's kind of a lot to it, despite most of the plot being fairly mundane. I will say that this is definitely one that you want to check content warning stuff on. I put a list on both reviews for it, so Goodreads and Storygraph, although I tend to recommend Storygraph more if you're trying to figure out content warnings, just because more people can add them on there. But that is the rest of yesterday's reading. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do today. I just got off of work. So, there's a chance I'll pick up one of my physical books. But I do have some things to do around the house. So I may pick up one of the audiobooks. It's probably going to be fiction. So we'll see what happens and we'll see what's available. Alright, I'm just halfway through Feed Them Silence. I think I'm going to take a break because my eyeballs cannot see the words very well at this point. But it's really good so far. And so the basic premise is that, I've been reading this whole book and I don't know what the fucking main character's name is. I can think of her wife's name. And the fucking wolf's name. Sean. Okay. The whole premise of this is that Sean is a scientist who has been working on this big project in the future, set in the future, where she's going to basically be able to observe a wolf from like inside the wolf's brain. So she's like kind of experiencing what the wolf is experiencing. And as much as that's a big part of the plot, really a lot of it revolves around her and her wife's relationship that's been on a decline, it seems. So it's a really interesting like character study, while at the same time I think says a lot of stuff about the environment, especially with the details that you get about what stuff is going to look like. I think this is set in like 10 years into the future, and stuff ecologically is also declining a lot. It's doing some really interesting things, and the character is definitely, she's not unsympathetic, but she's definitely extremely selfish. So definitely very flawed in that way. I'm not sure that I would call her unlikable necessarily, but we'll see what I think at the end of the book. But yeah, there's a lot in this that's just really interesting, and I think it's saying a lot of stuff about like relationships and connection, humanity, as well as the environment and so forth. So it's really cool, really interesting, but I'm going to have a break because my eyes are really not wanting me to focus, or are really not wanting to focus. So I'll make some coffee, I guess, and see what happens from there. Okay, I finished Feed Them Silence. It's so interesting, and I promise I'm getting somewhere here. But before I read it, I was trying to decide if this should go in sci-fi or horror. I work at a bookstore. Because Summer Sons was in horror and this was in sci-fi. Or at least that's where it had been placed. I honestly don't know where the publisher said to put it off the top of my head right now, but after reading it, I'm kind of pondering that same question. Particularly because, like, there, I guess, were some kind of, like, visceral details of, like, the wolves and stuff, but the thing that really makes it horror to me has a lot more to do with, I guess, the like capitalist eco-apocalypse of it all. Like, not that that's like, it's not necessarily an apocalyptic book, but like I guess it's like more, the world in it is more like hyper-capitalist than this one is, but honestly not by very much. And I won't say what the ending is, but something about it. I would very much argue that this was horror, but whether or not a horror reader would get what they're expecting is another question, but then that goes into, critiques of the idea that horror has to be one specific thing, and basically this is a much more like the horrors of like what humans are doing currently. Anyways, maybe I wasn't going somewhere with all of this. I really liked it. I thought that it was really well done. It's also like, it's not just depressing because of like one ending or another. Like, I guess it's just depressing more that I see like how real life it is, especially reading in the acknowledgments that they wrote this like during the COVID lockdown. I know I sound really bleak right now, but this was very good. It was very well done. And I think also that a novella was definitely an appropriate length for this. As much as it might be interesting to see kind of how the character got where she is in terms of like morals and ethics and stuff like that, I almost don't think that it's necessary, although it might be interesting, just like any like kind of longer character thing would be interesting. And I also don't think that a follow-up or like going longer would be great either, because, well, I won't elaborate because that would kind of give stuff away, but I do think this is like the perfect length for this. Also, reading this as a researcher was very interesting. I got my degree in sociology, so I'm used to working with people. And I specifically do qualitative research, so it's interesting that kind of the big piece, or one of the big pieces of like while they were trying to do the research, was parsing apart the emotion from everything else, because it's like you can't really do that, just generally speaking. And the fact that her like own personal stuff impacted like why she's doing the research and a lot of the perspectives, and yet she's not saying any of that or putting any of that into her research, which to me, like, I don't know, it makes me think a lot about just what I've read on like research ethics and stuff, and like feminist research methods, and the idea of actually like putting yourself, like your own perspective, your own lens, making it obvious instead of obfuscating it, which is basically what like coming at stuff from a more objective lens usually does, with a few exceptions, quite possibly, in the realm of like kind of pure mathematics and maybe physics. But I think that there are a lot of interesting, there's a lot of interesting discussion and implications around research ethics, and stuff like that too. So this is very good. Between this and Little Fish, though, I need something happy. A little bit more uplifting. So my TBR is somewhere over here. I'm probably gonna go with Magical Boy and see what that's like. So that'll be my next read. Alright, it is now the final day of the Trans Rights Readathon. I worked throughout the weekend, and just didn't film anything. On Friday, I read Magical Boy, Volume 1, which is a YA graphic novel / manga about a trans boy who his family has a legacy of like magical girls that are supposed to save the world, and he inherits those powers. So it's kind of like a trans riff on that. There's a lot of good stuff in there about friendship, I think. And it's just really well done. It's really fun. I'm looking forward to reading the second volume. So that was a lot of fun. The other thing I've been working through reading is The Big Reveal, Sasha Velour's book, which was also something that I impulse bought at work because I felt like crap. This is actually what the inside looks like. The book jacket is... So that's what it looks like on the shelf. But it's very neat so far. It's partly a history of drag. So there's a lot of overlap with the trans history that Leslie Fienberg went into in Transgender Warriors. They do talk about different details, which is cool. And Sasha actually references one of Leslie Fienberg's pamphlets in here. So I thought that was a cool little reading connection. There's also some memoir elements, her like coming into drag and what some of it means to her. But anyways, I've been working through that. I'm not super far. I'm like a fourth of the way into it. I don't know that I will finish it for the Trans Readathon. But I did over the weekend listen to an audiobook as well. I listened to Rick by Alex Gino, which is in the same universe as Melissa. Rick is starting middle school and is feeling questions about his sexuality because people keep bringing up like liking how people look and stuff like that, and he just isn't getting it. And he starting this new school is starting to meet more people, figure out really the true nature of the people that he thought were friends. So it talks a lot about friendship, questioning your sexuality, asexuality. There's also a plot line with his granddad that was really sweet, like getting to know his grandpa more and connecting with sci-fi also gave me a lot of feelings, thinking about my granddad who was also super into sci-fi. I kind of assumed that the show that they made up for the purposes of the book was a nod to Star Trek. But yeah, it was cute, a little hokey, but in the way that middle grade just is sweet. It's really nice that like a situation like that is possible for so many kids. Also a little sad, I guess, but also like it makes me more angry that there are a lot of kids who like something like that could be a reality, but there are so many people who are resistant, especially looking at all of the or a lot of the laws coming in a lot of different states. They're very much targeting youth, especially trans youth. But there are even some things about like GSAs and things like that that are going through. I don't know the specifics of some of these bills because I just can't. I can't. It's, but I know enough and it's stressful. And I also know even before all of these laws and stuff, there was, it was harder in a lot of these states, even without like the don't say gay bills and stuff like that. And one of the first years that I was teaching like by myself, I was teaching college classes at a high school, so I would use other people's classrooms. And one of the teachers whose classroom I used was actually the faculty advisor for the GSA in this particular high school, and I got to talk to her a little bit. And like they couldn't even put like gay in the name of the club. Like it was called like something with rainbows in it or something like that. Because they wouldn't allow it otherwise. So that's without all this extra stuff. That was in like like 2018, I think. Again, I feel like I'm rambling. I don't know what's happening. But it is the last day of the Trans Rights Readathon. So I'm going to book journal, and then I'm going to decide if I want to just keep reading some of Sasha Velour or if I want to read some short books. I also need to go through the kids' books that I read because I've taken pictures of children's picture books that I've read because I've been in the kids department of work doing some stuff. I don't think any of them fit for the Trans Rights Readathon, but I do need to like put them in Goodreads just because I did read them. It's expanding my knowledge of the kids department. Some of them were cute. Well, I mean, most of them were cute, but some of them were good. Like, better than some of the others. But that's all I have for now. It is past the end of the Trans Rights Readathon at this point. I did not end up finishing the big reveal, but I am still reading it. I'm almost done. And it's amazing so far. To wrap up, I read 4 books, started a 5th one. I donated $5 per book, including the partly finished one, to my sister's house. I had at least 3 other people say that they were donating, which is wonderful. And definitely check out Sim Kern's TikTok page or Instagram page and find out more about what the readathon did as a whole, because the statistics on it are really incredible. There were over 2,000 people that joined, and thousands of dollars were raised for trans people and trans organizations. In the comments, let me know whether or not you participated and what your favorite read was. And if you didn't get to, let me know about your favorite book by a trans author. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye.